You open the notification. You read every word. You put the phone down. And then, nothing. You don't reply. Not because you forgot, not because you didn't care. You saw it. You processed it. And somewhere between reading and responding, something stopped you. Quietly, almost invisibly. And you moved on with your day carrying the weight of that unanswered message like a small stone in your pocket. If that's familiar, stay with this. Most people around you probably have a theory about this. They call it avoidance. They call it rudeness. Some people who care about you have probably felt hurt by it, have sat waiting, wondering why you can read something and not respond. And you've probably tried to explain it. Maybe you've said, I was going to reply later, or I just needed a minute. And both of those things were true. But they don't quite capture what's actually happening inside you when you see that message and go still. The world tends to judge this behavior as cold, as passive, as a form of disconnection. But that framing misses something important, something that sits much deeper than manners or social habits. There's a particular kind of person who checks their messages immediately, reads them carefully, and then enters what feels like a quiet stall. Not avoidance, not indifference, something more complex than either of those words can hold. And what's happening in that moment has a psychological name, a neurological signature, and if you trace it back far enough, a very human origin story. This behavior is rarely explained correctly. Most content stops at they're anxious or they're overwhelmed. But there's more going on here. There's a whole architecture of thought and feeling that runs beneath the surface of that unreturned message, and understanding it changes how you see yourself entirely. When you read a message, your brain doesn't just receive information. It begins a rapid, largely unconscious process of social simulation, running through possible responses, anticipating reactions, modeling the emotional state of the sender, weighing tone, weighing timing, weighing what your reply will mean to the other person. Researchers studying social cognition have found that for certain individuals, this process is significantly more elaborate than average. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, social reasoning, and emotional regulation, activates at a higher intensity. What looks like inaction from the outside is actually a quiet storm of processing on the inside. This is sometimes linked to what psychologists call response elaboration, a tendency to mentally draft, evaluate, and discard responses before ever committing to one. For people who do this, sending a casual reply isn't casual at all. It carries weight. It feels like a small act of self-exposure. And the nervous system, trained over years to be careful, keeps saying, not yet. There's also something happening with emotional bandwidth. The research on cognitive load tells us that when a person is carrying a significant amount of internal processing, stress, unresolved thought, background emotional noise, external demands feel disproportionately heavy. Reading feels manageable. Responding requires resource allocation that, in that moment, the system simply doesn't have available. So the brain files it, holds it, and tends to return to it when conditions feel right. Here's where it gets personal. For many people who live with this pattern, it didn't start as a habit. It started as adaptation. Think about early environments where communication felt risky, where saying the wrong thing had consequences, where emotional attunement was something you had to earn rather than expect. Children who grew up in those environments learned to slow down before speaking, to read the room before engaging, to wait until they were sure. That waiting became internal policy. The nervous system learned that premature response could lead to misunderstanding, conflict, or disappointment, and so it built a delay mechanism, a buffer, a small protected space between input and output where the self could be preserved. What you're experiencing now as an adult with a phone in your hand is the same nervous system running the same protocol, slightly updated but structurally identical. It was never about the other person. It was always about safety. And this is important to say clearly.
This is not better or worse than being someone who replies instantly. Some people externalize their processing. They think through typing. They connect through immediacy. They feel most themselves in rapid back and forth. Neither pattern is more emotionally intelligent. Neither is more loving. They're different architectures, different learned grammars of relating, and the world needs both. The person who replies instantly is not more present. The person who waits is not more thoughtful. These are simply different ways of being in relationship with communication, shaped by different histories, different nervous systems, different early lessons about what it means to be heard. Here's where the part that surprises most people. The very thing that makes it hard to reply quickly is often the same thing that makes your replies, when they finally come, carry unusual weight. People who process deeply before responding tend to say things that land differently. They tend to notice what others miss. They often write messages that feel like they were written specifically for the person receiving them, because you spent time there, in that quiet interior space before you let the words out. The delay isn't empty, it's full. It's full of consideration that most fast reply culture never generates. But there is a cost, and it's worth naming honestly. The people who love you sometimes experience your silence as distance. They can't see inside the processing. They only see the unanswered message. And that gap between your inner attentiveness and your outer stillness can create confusion, sometimes loneliness, in people who are waiting on the other side. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because this particular architecture is invisible to everyone except you. If something in this felt true, if you recognized yourself in some corner of what was described here, there's likely more worth understanding. Because people who process this way tend to share other quiet patterns, and how they handle conflict, and how they experience overstimulation, and how they love, and how they disappear, and how they return. And those patterns taken together tell a story about a kind of person that psychology is only beginning to describe with the precision they deserve. That story continues if you want to follow it.